focused on the highest priority, and we reordered those. Having said that, when I'm also going in to do a change in an organization, and had to do that when we literally got rid of a department. I don't know if you're aware that when I was secretary, we actually took the Teal data center and it got integrated with the data processing out of HHS, the non-health specific data processing. The business plan that was put together for that, we did at BT&H. We did do what is often called in the private sector a change management organization in the literature, sourcing it with or staffing it with existing personnel. But it was a mission-driven entity that didn't cost any new people, didn't cost any new budget. It was a reorganization of effort, and something like that is most likely going to be needed to assist in this cultural change. Assemblymember Gordon said maybe some money for staffing. I could give you a number if you said to us, what would it take in terms of additional dollars to transform the culture of the state of California, and it would be so small you'd probably laugh at it. A lot of that effort would be contributed, could be donated, would be donated by the stakeholders or experts who want to assist you. So there's a way to mobilize that. I know that people will come forward. I had over 50 folks who sat for 3 years advising me pro bono at BT&H, meeting actually with departments, hearing the results. There were more of sort of a sounding board. And when we did that Teal data center consolidation with HHS, I had a peer review panel of the best outside folks we could identify, because for me, doing data, anything with data processing or data systems is like performing without a net. And the state of California has a very poor record on these kinds of efforts, so I wanted to have some folks there to help me. And that actually was what the legislature relied on in the end, was the business plan that had come from a change management organization using existing personnel that had been peer reviewed. So very little. In BT&H, we saved $81 million. I had no new money, no new people.
I'd just like to speak a little bit to that. I don't think it's necessary to reinvent the wheel. We know that this type of management structure has been put into effect in states, other states. We can look to their experience. We know that cities and counties within California have also done this program. We have had witnesses. My hearing in front of Governance and Finance, there were things that we focused on each time. How much did it cost you? And there was always the initial bureaucratic reluctance and intransigence and exaggeration of what this would take. And then over time, it was clear that the expenses were nowhere near that amount. And in fact, the savings and the participation and morale of those who are providing these services increased. There were no downsides that we found. But again, it takes, with respect to the state of California, it will require executive leadership sustained over time, and it will take legislative leadership sustained over time and partnership. Because it's not enough for them to set goals. We have to be involved in that, and that's what our legislation does. And then we have to follow through with looking at and evaluating each year what's working and what isn't.
If I could just add to that one other point, our experience in San Mateo. It takes clear vision and expectations at the top. And it takes the alignment of those expectations with the rank and file to see that it's meaningful and it's a part of their work. And for us, the aha moment came when the sergeant in our sheriff's department, who was also the head of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, who hated the idea and fought with it from day one, came to me about a year and a half after we started the program and said, this stuff is really valuable to me to manage my people in the field and keep them focused on what they're supposed to be doing. And then the organization could really be focused in not just what the expectations were, but in getting the work done in the field.
Ms. Buchanan. Oh, sorry. Ms. Ross,
you could do what the private sector would do in this case, which is to log the hours you spend. And I think to a certain extent, this is why starting small and then ramping up makes some sense. Is there is a staff time cost in most organizations with tight budgets. It's moving people from one place to another. Log the time spent. And that can be one of the outcomes that you're looking to as you start to implement this type of an approach.
Ms. Buchanan.
I think I'll make my sort of concluding comments here. And I'd like to start out by saying I think we all agree that what we're doing isn't working. And business gave up workload budgeting a long time ago. I mean, when I was at Delta Dental in the 80s, I brought in zero-based budgeting. So that's, a long time ago. And most local agencies, when I ran for school board in 1990 and we had to cut 10% of our budget in 91, we went to a zero-based and started implementing performance systems. So most local agencies haven't been doing it for at least 1 or 2 decades or longer. And when you have a workload budget, what happens is you say, okay, whatever I spent last year, I'm going to adjust that for inflation and population, and that's my base for next year. And so, Lois, if you're really efficient and you look at what you're doing and you say, if we automated this and did this and that or whatever, I think we can improve our service to our customers and reduce our costs by 25%. You do that and I give you 25% fewer dollars. But if Sonny says, we're just going to keep doing what we have, whether it's working or not, I give you the same amount of money or more. So I actually have a system under work-based budgeting that penalizes the managers and the agency heads that really try and improve the systems and build a better product. So it doesn't work. A couple of years ago, I think it was Caltrans was in the paper for buying all the cars in June. Remember that? We all know why they bought them in June. They've had money left over in their budget. If they bought them in June, it added to their base so they'd have more money for the following year. Because those are the kinds of things that workload budgeting encourages. And those aren't the kind of incentives we should have in government. I was asked to chair a budget committee last spring, so I sort of came in mid-process. Mr. Gordon actually is chairing part of it now, and he's had the good fortune of coming in right at the beginning. But, it was amazing to me. It was transportation and information technology. It was amazing to me, whether it was Caltrans or high-speed rail, how fundamental questions that you would expect to have answers to be able to develop budgets couldn't be answered. You might remember the LAO report on Caltrans. It was pretty scathing. And they said, well, it's not true. And I said, well, let's sit down and talk about it. But nothing was tracked. I mean, there was no way of knowing whether or not, these projects were really being managed well or not well or whatever. We knew that anecdotally that people had seen improvements in what we were doing, but we had no way of really measuring or knowing that. And as a budget chair, what's particularly frustrating is we never see budgets. If you think about what we do as budget chairs, all we do is process these. All we do is process BCPs. And what you get is the feds are asking us to do this new report for whatever it is, and we need 3 more people or 5 more people. And I look at it as a budget chair, and I have no way of knowing, do you really need 3 more people or 5 more people? Well, finance is telling me, someone else is telling me, so I guess we should approve it. But I don't know that, I know if I decide to write twice as many bills next year, the speaker's not going to give me twice as many people. We've got to figure out a way to get it done. But I don't know when I get those BCPs, did someone look at that to say, yes, we can get it done with what we have, we're going to do things differently, or we do really need more people or whatever. And that's not trying to be disparaging of any of our agencies or departments. We just don't know when we take a look at the budgets. So what I do know is this. My experience with performance-based, zero-based budgeting is that even if it does cost money, that it saves more money than it costs. Two is, I think we somehow here have gotten off to talking about performance-based budgeting as though we're implementing a new system like Fiscal or 21st Century or one of those, and I don't think that's really what we're talking about. You know, I think we need the legislature to take a look at its budgeting and how we run our committees and what we look at, so we're sure that at that macro level we were talking about, okay? Because we're the ones that have to decide, do I keep this program or do I keep another program, or what do I do? You know, we have to make those kind of value decisions you were talking about. We need good information. So that's our job. But also the governor needs to decide what kind of culture you want within. And so the governor's going to need to decide when he appoints Sonny or someone else at the head of an agency, what culture you want and how you want those agencies to work. And my belief is that performance-based budgeting, we probably will need to provide some training to the agency heads and some of the managers, but it really gets down to one simple question. It gets down to being clear on what your goals are, and Sonny, if you're the agency head, you being able to ask your directors, managers, whoever, what data do you have what are you looking at? What data are you looking at to make those decisions? How do you know you're accomplishing those objectives? And there are going to be times when you don't have enough data, and you know that that's one of the areas you need to work on. And there are going to be times when some of it's manual, some of it's on. We're not going to have a perfect system, but you want to know that when they come to you because they need to add 2 more people or whatever, you need to know that they're looking at it. And even there are some legislators who have worried that, well, does that mean that there are going to be some social service type programs that we don't fund? And I say absolutely not. But even within those programs, don't you want to know if you get better outcomes even in CalWORKs if we're focusing on high school and college, if we're focusing on work training, how are we most successful so that we're accomplishing our goals and moving programs forward? So my belief is doing nothing is not acceptable, and we can't afford not to move forward because that's going to cost us too much money. So clearly what we need to do here is figure out a way to work together so we can start to take the first steps.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen described our budgeting in California as an unsatisfying process. Ms. Buchanan just did a masterful description of the challenge that I face as a budget sub-chair and wanting to be able to actually produce a budget, but only being able to look at budget change proposals. I want to make sure that that as we think about this, there are 2 elements, and one is I want to align myself with your comments, Ms. Buchanan, that we need to change the way we do budgeting. I also think that we have to find a way to make sure that as a part of that, we build in this culture shift around getting to performance. And my hope is that that our staff of this budget subcommittee will work with the author over the period of this break, that we will take a look at perhaps some ways to help focus some of this conversation in a way that gets us to a bill that guarantees that we keep costs low, maybe looks at a level of phased implementation, perhaps looks at bare minimum information that should be provided to budget committees, that identifies the kinds of tracking that we would want to see. So I think there's some things that can be worked on to make this a better product, and I'm hopeful that we will work on that over the break, and that we'll commit to coming back and hopefully having a chance to look at some revisions that I think help move this in a way that I think we need to move. I think this is the right direction for California and for a budget for California. I think it has tremendous benefits, not the least of which is making sure that the people understand that when we spend their dollar, we have spent it wisely and well. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, I know we could actually keep this hearing going on for another 6 hours easily, and we've already done 2.5 hours in it. But I don't, we're losing members left and right here, and it's late on the last day of, this is the only hearing standing between us and the district work period. So I won't belabor things. I'm going to make a few comments and then give you a chance to close, and then we'll continue the discussion. There's a lot of agreement, I think, around the table about the need for more outcomes-based management and the need for this type of thing, and the question is, how do we get there from here? And the bill itself provides us a good base for that. I have concerns that we discussed with some of the timing of it, for one thing, in terms of especially the first year, January 1, they have to have their performance-based budgeting in 10 days later, and we're already halfway through the year, and I don't think it's realistic to expect that, and I think it's important that we get out of the box in a way that's effective, because we don't want we've already had one failure on performance-based budgeting in 1993, and we don't want to repeat that. We want to build on the successes, as was mentioned, of other states, and not reinvent the wheel, and figure out what's there. And also, as there's been an expressed desire by folks and the author as well, to keep the costs limited, not to have every little thing, every budget, every performance-based thing come back to us from bureaucrats saying, well, that's going to cost us $10 million. Otherwise, this proposal, I've heard estimates on this proposal of hundreds of millions of dollars, which is ludicrous, but if it would be hundreds of millions of dollars if we had these kind of BCPs to get performance measures. So we have to figure out a way to really limit the costs and focus on the outcomes. The other aspect of this is part of the answer is legislative, but part of the answer is really leadership. We could have. There's nothing that stopped us in the last decade in the legislature or in the governor's office from adopting performance-based measures and models and asking those questions and forcing our direction, and we should have. I've tried in my own small way establishing this subcommittee as a move to do that. In fact, we called 3 different agencies a couple of months ago to the table, and we said we want to change the culture, which is something we've talked about here, but something was our expressed desire as a subcommittee. And we're not waiting for legislation for that. We're saying whether the governor's office is with us or not, and I think they will be with us. That's not a gauntlet throwing down, but we're gonna move forward and make that happen. And we asked them to come back in September with a series of metrics, and we're going to evaluate those metrics, and we're going to hold them accountable to those metrics. And we're just doing that. Nobody, it's a self-appointed group where, they make sense. We're a budget subcommittee which is sort of the Uber subcommittee because it's comprised of all the sub-chairs. And we can do it, and I think we're gonna work to force that dialogue. Similarly, in the governor's office, we haven't had, we have a new governor now, but we haven't had a governor who's a manager in quite a long time. And part of governing is not just making decisions, but is management. I was involved as a staff member of the House Budget Committee back when Al Gore's big thing was reinventing government, and we were working with them to figure out how we could change the model of government. And I saw firsthand how several agencies were radically transformed. The best example of that was at the time was FEMA. FEMA had been the worst federal agency in the nation, and after James Lee Witt and some other folks put some real management techniques to it, and after the administration committed to outcomes, that changed. And fortunately, I was working for Congressman Berman at the time when the earthquake hit. FEMA was probably at its apex at the time that earthquake hit, and they were very responsive. Sadly, when management during the Bush years, when folks decided that management wasn't important, we saw what happened to FEMA, and FEMA became, again, it fell from being the best agency to being one of the worst, and we had the national shame that is Katrina, which in many respects wasn't just a question of values at the top, it was a question of management. So all that is to say is that I think a large part of performance-based budgeting is not legislative, but is leadership-driven. In as much as we can inform and incentivize leadership both in the executive branch and the legislative branch through legislation, I want to be part of that effort to do that. At the same time, I want to be cognizant that we don't, sort of hearkening back to some of the opening comments I make, that we don't do an unnecessary or inappropriate shift in the balance of power between the executive and the legislative branch, which is one of my fears as we move forward on some of this, is also that we don't lock in, by statute certain things in the legislature that really we should have ability to be flexible on in terms of some of our timelines and which committees do what. But I'm confident that the author is willing to work with me on those issues, because at the end of the day, your drive in this, I'm confident, is not any of the given specifics of this bill in terms of this committee being decided to do that or that committee. It's the idea of changing the culture and moving something forward. So in some ways, this bill may have to be a little bit more vague in some ways by pushing toward the intent, and in some ways maybe more specific. But that's what this process is about, and it was suggested we do another hearing, and I'm open to that. I think this is a really important topic, and I want to give it the time that it deserves, because unlike a lot of bills that are going to go through other committees, this bill is exclusively the purview of the Budget Committee. There's no other financial committee. It doesn't go to appropriations. We're the line of defense on that. So that's partly why we have the suspense file, to make sure that we're not inadvertently throwing in a $40 million burden on the state, of which is going to end up at the end causing us to make cuts to critical programs that we care about, which is the exact opposite of this. We want to create efficiency so that we can do more and better programs. All that being said, I really appreciate the author spending the time with us here, bringing this issue forward to the committee, and her commitment to continue to work with us. And with that, I thank you, and I'll give you your opportunity to close and have the last word on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I, too, want to thank you for having this hearing and for engaging with me on this issue. I appreciate that, and I welcome the engagement of the committee over the next few weeks so that we can further refine all the details that we talked about, implementation issues and clarifications, whatever we need to do. And I also look forward and thank the administration for engaging recently, and I look forward to working with them on this issue. So the basics of the bill are straightforward. The executive and the legislative, we have a partnership in doing this. We have a similar interest in doing this. The executive needs to commit to the development of results-based approaches to budgeting. Those performance outcomes and metrics need to be, it seems to me, reviewed by the legislature. We've established a certain task force to do that, which includes both Senate and Assembly committees, Controller, Director of Finance. We're open to the details of that. But we think that review, that exchange would be a good one. We look at phasing in over time. Our proposal is over 3 years and beginning with realignment programs. We're open to the suggestions of the committee as we move through this. The legislature has its role in reviewing the programs once these are and having been on a budget subcommittee and on a budget committee since 2002, I would welcome the opportunity to really have a good review on whether a program is working, is it achieving its goal, Should we be doing something else? Maybe we need the resources to go in a different direction. That would be a very positive thing, and that's incorporated into this, again, with not much detail other than a designated committee of the legislature has the task of reviewing programs once every 10 years, at least. And the web and transparency piece of this is added in so that we increase the accountability and the openness of our process. Ultimately, I would just like to close by the place where I began, which is I believe that ultimately for me this is about the restoration of trust by the citizen and how we spend our money. If we want realignment to succeed, if we're going to look for new revenues from the public, it is essential that we be able to say we are spending your dollar wisely, especially if we're going to be asking for more over time. It's very important that the citizen believe that their money is being invested in the best possible way and that we're achieving goals and objectives that matter to the citizens of the state. So I look forward to continuing to work with you, and thanks again for this hearing. I appreciate the thoughtfulness. And my
Thank you.
witnesses, too.
Yeah, and thank you to the witnesses. And as I mentioned, this bill will go to the suspense file, and we'll now call up our final author, Mr. Senator DeSaulnier. Now, Senator, I should say, partly because the Senate has taken a lot longer than we expected. Okay. Good clarification, because we're losing members left and right here on the committee, but Mr. Gordon will be back. I'm going to leave it to you. I'm happy to stay and entertain, and we can discuss your bill. If you'd prefer to have it aired when we have a full subcommittee, I'm happy to put this over until we have that. We've had some discussion on two-year budgeting, given the Mr. Fuhr had his bill up, and we talked a little bit about it. But we've got witnesses here. If you want to sort of establish the record and start that process, I'm happy to hear it as well. But I want to give you that option. So.
I appreciate that. It's fine with my witnesses. I'm mindful that we're all anxious. For me, this will be my first summer break in the time that I've been here. And I really would, and I value what you've just done with my colleague, and since I'm co-author of that bill, value the time and the thoughtfulness you put into that. And if it's better that we try again, then that's fine with me. It's fine with our witnesses and my sponsor. We will defer then.
It's up to you. I mean, I said we can have a hearing, but the hearing, as you can see, is
it's with brilliant members of the committee.
Is obviously the quantity is what we're looking.
Is with a couple of members of the committee and
the quality,
and not even the bipartisan committee at this point, because all of our Republican members have had to leave. We've been going for about 3 hours, but you're here, and again, do you wish to defer it, or you wish to?
I'm trying to follow your lead. You're the chair of the committee. I'm more than happy to defer it, given that you had such good comments. If you think we can schedule another hearing, or if your suggestion is, from what I heard from the last one, is that you may have another hearing on performance-based, since this is a partner with Senator Wolk's bill, I'm happy to defer it as well. So it's fine with me either way, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So then why don't we defer it so we can, I mean, these reform issues, they're not, I mean, it's time sensitive in a sense, but we're not deadline driven like the other issues, and there is, I think there's a lot of value to getting the discussion of the group, because this is not just a subcommittee of the budget committee, but this is sort of a thought committee of the assembly, and really I think we're the ideas that come out of this committee are going to drive the process. So I think it does serve us better, but I did want to give you, since we had it scheduled, give that ultimate decision to you. But if that's your choice, we'll defer it to another time, but not clearly stating for the record, not because it's any less important than the other bills that we've heard, but just so that we can have a more thorough discussion.
Happy to do that. Given that your two committee members who are still here are co-authors, it's probably best to wait and try to talk to other members who we need not preach to the converted.
Fair enough. Then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.